Hello and welcome to Buy the Book. I'm your host, Joe Hebert. Today we continue our course on truth, justice, and leadership with the last in our series of discussions of Alexis de Tocqueville. Tocqueville, writing in the 1830s and 1840s, second half of the book, publishes Democracy in America, which is to this day one of the greatest analyses of American government and society that has been written. But we're looking at it primarily from the philosophical angle. Tocqueville is using philosophy. He is steeped in classical and modern philosophy, and he is using the ideas of the philosophers to try to analyze the significance of modern democracy using America as a model. So in our discussion, we started with Tocqueville's account of science, and he's looking at a classical view of science as contemplative and a modern view of science as a way of obtaining control over things, which is related to that Machiavellian idea of the conquest of fortune. Then we saw Tocqueville's views on literature. Again, he makes a very sharp distinction between classical and modern literature. Classical literature has that more contemplative focus, and it's more of a basking in the reality of things and trying to get into as much nuance and precision as possible to understand things, whereas modern literature tends to have a more pragmatic approach of trying to convey certain information or feelings, sentiments, responses from the readers. And one of the things that we see in these discussions is that Tocqueville is trying to preserve the wisdom of the classical approach. He is friendly to modernity in the sense of not wanting to overturn it, but he is trying to call attention to the things that are missing that can be counterbalanced or corrected. So in his own writing, for example, we can see that he is adopting elements of what he considers the modern style, but he's also trying to bring a sort of classical precision into the mix. Then we looked at Tocqueville's thoughts on self-interest. And we know from Machiavelli that from a Machiavellian point of view, people are fundamentally selfish. But according to Tocqueville, that's an incorrect view of human nature. We do have a selfish side of our nature, and it's really important to see that the classical view is more complex than the Machiavellian view. It's not denying that we have a selfish side. It's saying we also have an unselfish side, a side of our nature that actually longs for what is true, good, and beautiful. And in the context of doing good deeds, for example, Tocqueville says there is a natural instinct for that. And so the doctrine, as he puts it, of interest well understood, which means encouraging people to do good for their own benefit, he says that is overall the best doctrine that you can teach in modern times, because if you teach, pure virtue, not as many people are going to listen to that. But on the other hand, he wants the reader to know that there is a higher virtue, and that it's not really adequate for us to settle for mere, interest well understood. We should be aiming higher than that. And then finally, we looked at Tocqueville's views on materialism. Materialism in the sense of an obsession or an addiction to material goods and the accumulation and enjoyment of material goods. And his key message here is that he has some sympathy for, there's material progress, because when he talks about the ancient world, part of the picture is that, most people were not so preoccupied with material goods. That's because some people had them and they weren't not afraid of losing them, the aristocracy. But then many people just didn't have them and they couldn't get them, so they didn't bother thinking about them. So there's an irony to that, right? I mean, there's a lot of people doing without. So he appreciates the expansion of material goods in the modern world, but he also talks about how it's a trap, because we can never have enough. We're always either wanting more or we're afraid of losing what we have. And it becomes just an anxiety-inducing sort of gerbil wheel in which happiness cannot be achieved. And again, he turns to human nature and he says there's more to human nature than this. We actually desire beyond the material realm. And he says the soul has needs that must be satisfied. But when he looks at religion, we had seen in terms of self-interest that he says there's a beautiful doctrine of Christianity which is that the ultimate reason that we want to do good is to actually know the order, the admirable order of things, to see the face of God, to actually just understand and bask in the nature of things. And when he gets to religion in terms of materialism, in the section on materialism, his first reference to it is less admirable than that, right? He talks about how people who are addicted to material things will suddenly break away from them and go into these extravagant, fierce, kind of spiritual experiences. And he's not a fan of that. He's not in favor of it because the soul has needs that must be satisfied. But in order to do that, we have to understand the soul and we have to have a plan for satisfying it. We can't just be randomly trying to grasp for something to satisfy the soul. So where this brings us to this point is we have a soul, we need to satisfy it. If we're focused only on material things, we will never satisfy our soul and we'll never be happy. If we realize that we need something beyond material things, then we might sort of randomly grasp for some immaterial things, but we don't know what we're doing, and so we end up failing. So the last piece that we're going to look at in this episode is what is the positive advice? Where is there an actual positive model for correcting this? And this brings us to the final chapter that we're going to look at. And so to be precise, this is in volume 2, part 2, chapter 15. In a certain sense, I would say the most important chapter in Democracy in America. Why is this? Well, the first thing will appear just from the title. So let's take a look. How from time to time, religious beliefs divert the soul of the Americans toward non-material enjoyments. So the first thing I'll point out is that we've just heard that Tocqueville say that the soul has needs that must be satisfied. That's an important formula because throughout the book, he's reminding us that human nature is more complex than what Machiavelli tells us. What makes it more complex is precisely the existence of the soul, which Machiavelli never spoke of because Machiavelli was deliberately setting this aside and denying that there is a soul in the sense of classical philosophy, which Tocqueville believes in and is trying to revive. So this chapter 15 here is the only chapter in the entire book where the word soul is in the title of the chapter. So that's one of the signs that this is a very significant chapter. Tocqueville is going to tell us more about the soul here than he does anywhere else, even though he's invoking it throughout the book. We're also going to see that this chapter talks about the whole art of the legislator, as Tocqueville puts it. Now, this is a work of political science. In the introduction, Tocqueville says he's trying to develop a new political science for a new world, but it's very rare that he stops and he just summarizes what it's all about. And now political science is classically understood to be a practical science. So the pinnacle of political science is in practice or governance or leadership. So the whole art of the legislator, as he puts it, would be one way of describing this is the pinnacle of political science. And he uses that expression in this chapter, not coincidentally the same chapter where he's going to tell us the most about the human soul, because as it turns out, Tocqueville is endorsing this Platonic view that politics is ultimately about the human soul. So all of that makes this a hugely significant chapter. Another thing I'll point out about the title, From Time to Time. We saw before that Tocqueville considers this kind of religious madness, like a mad dash, for some kind of religious experience, to be unimpressive and not really helpful. But on the other hand, the regime as a whole and society as a whole in modern times is not heavily focused on religion, and Tocqueville does not expect that it will be. It's going to be focused on commerce and entertainment and things like that. Religion is not going to be the predominant theme in modern times. So the most fruitful, the most constructive thing is in modern times is going to be somewhere in between this kind of religious madness of like random religiosity. On the other hand, you would have maybe just a religiosity that would permeate society, Well, it's not going to be, one of those is the first one, the madness part is not really helpful. The permeating society is not really possible. So this is something in between. From time to time, religious beliefs divert the soul of the Americans away from all its materialism. So reflecting on the big picture here, Tocqueville is not a Machiavellian. Machiavelli tells us that politics is all about control, that we're conquering fortune, we're mastering nature, we're achieving complete dominance over things. In classical political science and ethics, that is not possible. We cannot actually conquer chance or fortune. We can't actually have complete control over things. So since that's not possible, it's not the goal. And so it's quite possible, as we're going to see here, that the highest end of politics, cultivating the soul, is something that we cannot guarantee. There's nothing we can do that will guarantee the perfection of souls. And if religion, as he's going to argue, is the most powerful tool that we have to promote the well-being of souls, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a perfect solution, that it's going to fix everything. Tocqueville is not looking for that kind of solution because he's not Machiavellian. He doesn't believe there is such a solution to the political problem. So this is the pinnacle of politics for Tocqueville, and it is not a slam dunk. It's something that is going to, as he says, from time to time, it's going to do some good, but it doesn't mean that it's always going to be doing good. It doesn't mean it's going to fix everything. And with that in mind, let's take a look at what he does have to say about it. So he begins by painting this picture. In the United States, when the seventh day of each week arrives, commercial and industrial life seems suspended. All noise ceases. A profound rest, or rather a kind of solemn recollection, follows. The soul finally regains self-possession and contemplates itself. So even if this was the whole chapter, this would be telling us a lot. It would be telling us so much. We saw before how Tocqueville was complaining that there's no time for contemplation in the modern world. Well, the day of rest that religion provides provides a context for contemplation. Now, the soul has needs, but we're not aware that we have a soul, or we're not really aware what the needs of the soul are. Well, this provides an opportunity to contemplate that specifically, to actually meditate upon the existence of the soul. The soul regains self-possession. It attains self-awareness. And so this means that at least once a week, there's an opportunity for the vast majority of people. Back in the days when everybody was going to church pretty much, it's part of the customs of society. There's at least one day a week where people have an opportunity to realize that they have a soul and to realize what the needs of the soul are and to have time to reflect on that. So it doesn't guarantee the results, but it is a very significant thing. 1/7 of the calendar basically is given over to days where this becomes a distinct possibility. So how does it work? Tocqueville is emphasizing that this is a contrast. I mean, this is not, again, it's not permeating society. It's not defining the nature of life for people. But during this day, one day of the week, the places consecrated to commerce and industry are deserted. Each citizen, surrounded by his children, goes to church. There, strange discourses are held forth that do not seem much made for his ears. So the strangeness of it is very important. Tocqueville is emphasizing that this is a counterbalancing element in the regime. So if we like to think in terms of, say, authenticity or sincerity or things like that, you be you, let's just be ourselves, then this would be a problem. We would say, okay, this is a discordant note within the regime, because if the regime's all about commerce, why do we need a day where we're going to say no commerce today, right? But what's the point of that? It just seems like, do we want commerce or do we not want commerce, right? So it's really important to see here that Tocqueville, he's not holding up authenticity or sincerity as the highest goal of life. He understands that this kind of religion that butts in once a week and seems to, strange because it doesn't fit with what's going on the rest of the week, that it's open to criticism. In another part of the book, he talks about how there may be quite a bit of hypocrisy in America, people pretending to be believers who aren't really. If you look at how they live their life 6 days a week, you would think they couldn't really be that serious about it, right? They're not really listening too carefully to what they hear on that one day. Well, he says, yeah, it could be the case. There could be quite a bit of hypocrisy. But, at an individual level, that's a problem. But at a social level, and coming back to the individual level, there's something important about this. In terms of society, if everybody's doing this, then it creates the opportunity for people to learn what they're missing. And if they really are missing something, then every opportunity you can establish to help them to see that is a benefit. It's a plus for society. And that's, I think, the spirit in which Tocqueville is doing this. It's not just trying to say, hey, let's be consistent and authentic. If we have a problem, let's see what we can do to try to bring that to people's attention. So he, the churchgoer, hears about the innumerable evils caused by pride or covetousness. He is told about the necessity to control his desires, about the fine enjoyments attached to virtue alone. Remember he said before, oh, don't talk about virtue. You have to talk about self-interest, well understood. But he says at church, they talk about virtue, my goodness, and about the true happiness that accompanies it. So in other words, your true interest is to go beyond your interest, is to go to virtue, actual virtue. So these are strange words. This is breaking the rules that he established earlier for moralists. It's taken it beyond. It's going to what he had said is the actual truth of things, which is that we have a higher potential as human beings. This is the place where it's going to be revealed to the vast majority of people is when they go to church. So how do people react to this? Again, the overall context makes it clear that the majority of people are not so moved by this that they're going to ditch commerce and their obsession with commerce. Overall, Tocqueville is clear that Americans are in fact obsessed with material things. However, he does indicate that that is not a foregone conclusion for each person here. He says, back at home, you do not see this man run to his business ledgers. He opens the book of Holy Scriptures. There he finds sublime or touching portrayals of the grandeur and the goodness of the Creator, of the infinite magnificence of the works of God, of the elevated destiny reserved for men, of their duties and of their rights to immortality. These are all the things that he had said in the earlier sections that we looked at. This is what the soul longs for, and this is what, in modern democratic parlance, we don't even know how to talk about these things. We don't know how to talk about the sublime. We don't know how to talk about just the goodness and the grandeur of the nature, the admirable order of things. We don't know how to talk about virtue. These are things that are lost in modern lingo. And Tocqueville says, not only do you hear that when you go to church, but when you get home, you open up the scripture and you read about it. So really there is this entire day, and it's not only in the public, but also in private, that people are exposing themselves to this. So it has a real potential to make a real impact, even though it is not the general spirit of a modern society. So he summarizes here on the impact it has. From time to time, the American escapes in a way from himself, escapes from all the limitations of what we were talking about, of materialism and so forth, and how tearing himself away for a moment from the petty passions that agitate his life and from the transitory interests that fill it, he enters suddenly into an ideal world where everything is great, pure, and eternal. So because of this institution, Tocqueville is making clear there's an institution in the modern world that is an exception to all of the generalizations that he had made about modern society. And this is the means by which the vast majority of people can become aware of their own human potential that he has been talking about in this book. He does not expect that the average person is going to be going and reading his book. So he is talking to the leaders, the potential leaders of society, and saying, is the average person going to learn these things? He's going to learn it by going to church and going home and opening up the Bible. So here's where we get Tocqueville's statement on the art of the legislator. Where does this fit into his political science? he explains it here while he's also, in a sense, telling us what is the ultimate goal of his political science. Like, what's the whole point of this book, basically, okay? And he says, I do not doubt that the social and political constitution of a people disposes them to certain beliefs and to certain tastes in which they easily abound afterward. In this case, it would be materialism, right? He's been telling us materialism, commerce, these are the things, self-interest. These are the things that people are going to gravitate towards in the modern world. While these same causes turn them away from certain opinions and certain tendencies without their working at it themselves, and so to speak, without their suspecting it. That would be the soul, and everything connected to the soul. People turn away from that in modern times. Now he gets to the art of the legislator. What does a legislator have to say about this? All the art of the legislator consists in clearly discerning in advance these natural inclinations of human societies in order to know where the effort of the citizens must be aided and where it would instead be necessary to slow it down. So, among the tendencies of a society, the legislator needs to, first of all, know what they are. There's no point in encouraging things that people are going to do anyway. There's no point in discouraging things that people aren't going to do anyway. So save your energy. But the next part of it is evaluating those things, okay? Are those things healthy or are they unhealthy? And if they're healthy, then you want to encourage them. If they're unhealthy, you want to discourage them. So you put that together, it means if people are inclined towards something that's healthy, great, leave it alone. You don't need to do anything. If people are inclined towards something that's unhealthy, then you got to try to slow it down. If people are not inclined towards something that's healthy, you got to encourage it because they're not going to do it without encouragement. If people are inclined to something or not inclined to something unhealthy, then again, leave it alone because it's not going to be a threat. Okay, so those would be I think the logical categories that come out of this, the two different elements. On the one hand, what are the inclinations that people have? In the second half, and this is what Machiavelli never did, right? Evaluate it, good or bad. Is it good or is it bad? So like he said before, the need to control desires. The legislator wants to know what are the predominant desires, and then are they good or are they bad? And from there you can strategize, promote the good, discourage the bad. Okay, and he says these obligations differ according to the times. Why they differ? This is a very crucial point. What changes over different time? The last sentence here tells us, only the end toward which humanity must always head is unchanging. The means to reach that end constantly vary. So in other words, right and wrong, good and bad, these are unchanging. The goals of life, what is human nature, what is our potential as human beings? In this case, like the needs of the soul, the needs of the body, needs of the soul, they do not change. They are what they are by nature. What changes is the desires and the inclinations that we have in different time periods. In certain time periods, they're enraptured, with the soul and with things like that. In other time periods, they're just ignoring it. So that's what changes. And that's why Tocqueville thinks political science needs an updating, not because human nature changed, but because human nature, although it didn't change, is in different circumstances in the modern world, and there needs to be a different strategy for how to help people to realize their potential as human beings. So how does he apply this? This is a very interesting paragraph because Tocqueville is putting himself in the position of Machiavelli for a minute. And he's partly sympathetic with what Machiavelli did, but as we're going to see, he's waging sort of a counteroffensive against Machiavelli, but he still wants to indicate that he partly understands what Machiavelli did. If I were born in an aristocratic century, amid a nation in which the hereditary wealth of some and the irremediable poverty of others diverted men from the idea of the better, and here when he says the better, he means bettering their material condition, and as well held souls as if benumbed in the contemplation of another world. So in other words, an excessive preoccupation with spiritual things. This is interesting, right? Because he had criticized the excessive preoccupation with material things. But here he's saying there is such a thing as, in his view of it, as an excessive preoccupation with otherworldly things. He describes it as being benumbed in the contemplation of another world. So for Tocqueville, there is a certain golden mean of balancing the needs of the body and the soul. And even though he finds the soul is higher and greater and of much more importance than the body, he still thinks that you can overdo it, right? If you neglect your body too much, that you're overdoing it. So, and he's indicating that in aristocratic times, the times that Machiavelli was writing in and complaining about, remember, Machiavelli wants to get rid of that aristocracy. He just wants the prince and the people, get rid of the middlemen. So this is all related, and Tocqueville is saying, if I were in those times and I would realize that people are not doing enough for their material well-being and they're kind of paralyzed by spiritual ideas, I would want it to be possible for me to stimulate among such a people the sentiment of needs, that is, material needs. I would actually try to get them more interested in material things. I would think about finding more rapid and easier means to satisfy the new desires that I would have brought about. In other words, a little bit of conquering fortune, like a little bit of more effectual truth. Let's try to get more practical. So he's doing like a mini Machiavelli here. He's saying, if I were in the time period of Machiavelli, I would have been thinking in similar lines of Machiavelli. I would have been thinking, how do we get more practical? How do we get more material benefits out of things, right? In diverting the greatest efforts of the human mind toward physical study, I would try to excite the human mind in the pursuit of well-being. But what's his point here? Is he agreeing with Machiavelli? No, only to a degree, only halfway, right? He's saying, backing up, he had said, human nature does not change. The goal of human life does not change, but the circumstances change. So if our nature is body and soul, and we're excessively concerned about the soul, then fine, we should focus on promoting the body because that's what people are neglecting. But in modern times, because of Machiavelli, you could say, it's not all because of Machiavelli, but Machiavelli is a culprit. People are excessively concerned with the body and not the soul. And so now we have to do the opposite. We have to focus on the soul. So he clarifies that further in this paragraph. While man takes pleasure in this honest and legitimate pursuit of well-being, that's modern society, it's all about well-being, material well-being, it is to be feared that in the end he may lose the use of his most sublime faculties, and that by wanting to improve everything around him, again materially, wanting to conquer fortune and make everything comfortable and good, he may in the end degrade himself. So this is a very important formulation of what's wrong with modernity from Tocqueville's point of view. Is we're all intent on conquering the world and fixing all the problems of the world. Meanwhile, we're allowing our own selves, our own souls to just decompose and, to become weak and flaccid and unhealthy. The danger is there and nowhere else. So legislators in democracies and all honest, enlightened men who live in democracies, this is his audience, right? The leaders of modern society, everybody who has any kind of influence in modern society, they must apply themselves without respite to lifting up souls and keeping them pointed towards heaven. So that's the charge of this book. This is what Tocqueville's been trying to do in the book. He's trying to analyze modern life and modern institutions, modern sentiments and thoughts and behaviors, and put it all in this context of, yes, it's nice, it's wonderful that we're getting more practical. Let's not destroy our souls in the process, and let's think of ways to uplift the soul. It is necessary that all those who are interested in the future of democratic societies unite, and that all in concert make continual efforts to spread within these societies the taste for the infinite, the sentiment for the grand, and the love for non-material pleasures. So this is what Tocqueville's political science is all about. It is about reviving the soul. And for the leaders, that's going to mean that they have to really have a deeper understanding of the human soul and what it needs. And then for society as a whole, they have to find ways to communicate that. And he's telling them in this chapter that religion is the most powerful way to do that. So they should be promoting religion as much as possible, and not the fierce, spiritualism, the kind of random religion that he had mentioned earlier, but a regular habit of going to church on a regular basis kind of religion, combined with, of course, the substance that should be there. And he's made it clear what the substance is that he's interested in that should be there. Well, this is an interesting little turn that Tocqueville takes, because usually he has been very indirectly commenting on Machiavelli just by only looking at the Machiavellian tendencies within society. But of course, people who are following Machiavellian tendencies are not necessarily reading Machiavelli. They're not necessarily believing in Machiavellian philosophy. They're just kind of following their passions or their opportunities that arise in front of them. Okay, so this is a paragraph. It's one of the places where Tocqueville is going to talk about Machiavelli, or at least somebody who fits Machiavelli's description. He doesn't mention him by name. Okay, but he's going to talk about people who are materialists, who are philosophic materialists, people who are rejecting his view that there is a spiritual side to human nature. Who would that be? Well, in our course, we've looked at Machiavelli as a main example, right? So think about Machiavelli in this paragraph. If among the opinions of a democratic people, there exist a few of these harmful theories that tend to make you believe that everything perishes with the body, just think about Machiavelli completely ignoring God, completely ignoring the soul, completely ignoring morality in his whole book, as if, don't worry about that, right? It doesn't matter. It's imaginary. Consider the men who profess them as the natural enemies of the people. Now, this is really loaded, right? Because Machiavelli says, found on the people. Machiavelli's formula is supposed to be exactly what the people want. And notice how Tocqueville is going right for the jugular here. He's saying, Machiavelli, who says, found on the people, give the people what they want, he's an enemy of the people. He's portraying himself as a friend of the people, but he's actually an enemy of the people. Why is that? There are many things that offend me in the materialists. So the way he phrases it, it almost seems like it's a personal quarrel here. It's a subjective thing. He doesn't like them. Tocqueville doesn't like them. But watch that. Tocqueville is a brilliant rhetorician, and he invokes these kind of emotional reactions, in a purposeful kind of way. It's not that he's writing this and he's actually getting upset while he writes it. He can't help, saying, "Oh, I'm offended." He's trying to provoke us here. But the argument that follows is going to be a very dispassionate argument. It's going to be a very logical argument. It's going to be kind of a judo maneuver on Machiavelli. So let's take a look. There are many things that offend me, he says about them. Their doctrines seem pernicious to me, and their pride revolts me. So there's two categories of it. On the one hand, they're hurting people. They're causing harm. So we want to understand that. How are they harming people? And the second part is their pride. So what exactly is pride, and what's wrong with pride from Tocqueville's point of view? He elaborates mostly because this whole chapter and really the whole book is about the first part, what's harmful. It's depriving us of the sublime that we long for with the soul. So that's the harm, right? It's causing our souls to dry up and wither, which makes us unhappy. Okay, but what about the pride part? This is a beautiful thing that he does here. He says, if their system could be of some use to men, it seems that it would be in giving him a modest idea of himself. That, as a matter of fact, tends to be the strongest defense that people make of Machiavelli and of similar philosophers. They say that, when everybody's aiming at virtue and everybody's aiming at truth and all this stuff, people become proud and arrogant, and they're killing each other over religion. They're killing each other over all these highfalutin ideas. And so Machiavelli, by bringing things down to earth and saying, let's just accumulate wealth and let's be, secure and wealthy and prosperous, is making people more modest. Think about decency. Machiavelli says the people are decent. He doesn't mean it in a moral sense, but in an indirect kind of way, or in a bigger picture, it can be turned into a moral argument. It's going to be a more peaceful and modest kind of a world if people are just going after material goods. But here's what Tocqueville has to say about this. But they do not show that this is so. It doesn't turn out to be that way. And when they believe that they have sufficiently established that men are only brutes, in other words, they've reduced human beings, we don't really have souls, we're just animals, highly intelligent animals. We're completely material beings that just have very complex abilities to acquire material things. Once they think they've done that, they've proven that, they appear as proud as if they had demonstrated that men were gods. So think back to Machiavelli's Prince. Two things about it that I'll point to. One is, what was the purpose of writing The Prince? You could say Machiavelli hopes that the world's going to be a better place. Well, why would he care? According to his own theory that we're just slabs of meat that live for a little while and then we die, what difference does it make if you make the world a better place? And what good is it going to do him once he's dead? Right? But we know that Machiavelli himself insinuates as strongly as possible that his goal, like the great men that he talks about, his goal is glory. He wants to be followed after he's dead. He wants to have power and dominion after he's dead, and he wants the glory of that, being like Romulus, Theseus, Moses, etc. Well, what is the point of that, right? If his doctrine is true, that there is no morality and there's no truth and there's no soul and there's no afterlife and stuff, what good does that glory do him? What is that glory anyway? It's not even a material thing, right? So it doesn't seem to add up. And finally, if you consider that Machiavelli closes the book with the call to conquer fortune, and this effectively means that man is going to replace God. Because if God is the creator and the governor of all things, it's not our job to have absolute control over things. God controls things. And Machiavelli is deliberately displacing God and saying we are going to have control over things. So this is a glaring contradiction in Machiavellian thought. There might be an explanation for it, but Tocqueville doesn't seem to think there is. He thinks this is a glaring self-contradiction. It's a lack of self-knowledge. It's a lack of wisdom in Machiavelli himself and any Machiavellian. They don't know what they're really saying. They don't know what they really want. They don't know what they're really doing. And I think this is one of the more powerful, criticisms of Machiavelli, even though he doesn't name him by name, that we can find in the literature. So coming back to the art of the legislator, Tocqueville is going to sum it up in this way. He says, most religions are only general, simple, and practical means to teach men the immortality of the soul. Tocqueville, as I mentioned before, he's a fallen away Catholic. He is not writing this as a Catholic or as a believer. Later in the course, we're going to look at Thomas Aquinas. So we will see from an actual faith point of view of somebody who is a believer, how they understand these things. Suffice to say, as I already mentioned, Tocqueville had a really good education, including Thomas Aquinas. He understood what he was talking about when he talks about religion. I would say from a Catholic point of view, he understands it quite well, but he is not actually a believer when he's writing this. And so he is looking at religion as a useful tool, in this sense, similar to Machiavelli, except that the usefulness of it is not what Machiavelli was saying, of just to, impose your rule on people. Basically, religion is just a means of imposing, like Moses giving people the Ten Commandments so that Moses could be glorified, according to Machiavelli's interpretation. But for Tocqueville, it's all about actually lifting people's souls to heaven. Now, if you say, well, if you're not a believer, what does that mean? And this is what we're going to look at in the end of this discussion, and then getting into the next section of the course. Okay, what would it mean to contemplate God or contemplate the nature of things, not necessarily from a Christian point of view, but from a philosophical point of view, a classical philosophical point of view. And this is the direction that Tocqueville is going to go. But just to round this off, we're looking here at the practical implications. That is the greatest advantage that a democratic people draws from belief, and what makes these beliefs more necessary for such a people than for all others. That is that it teaches them about their soul. So for Tocqueville, this is the crucial part. You need religion because you need to remind people they have a soul. You need to teach them about their soul. And for most people, they're not going to learn that from books of philosophy. They're going to learn that from going to church. Okay, so when no matter which religion has put down deep roots within a democracy, be careful about weakening it, but instead protect it carefully as the most precious heritage of aristocratic centuries. So he's going to defend Christianity, but not necessarily he's not speaking as a Christian per se. He does, in fact, think that Christian theology has many beautiful elements that are more beautiful than what he sees in some other religions. But he's technically not endorsing Christianity as true. He's just saying that Christianity is the traditional religion of Europe and America. And so since you're in a democratic era where people are likely to lose their religion, hang on to it, because once you lose that one, you're not going to get a new one. Do not try to tear men away from their ancient religious opinions in order to substitute new ones, for fear that during the transition from one faith to another, when the soul finds itself for one moment devoid of beliefs, love of material enjoyments comes to spread and fill the soul entirely. So this is just a warning in the context of his new political science. Do not let Christianity fade away, because if it does, it will be virtually impossible to come up with a new way of teaching people about the soul. But if Tocqueville is, if he's not a believing Christian, well, what exactly does he think is the truth about the soul? Religion may be a good way of teaching people about the soul, but if it is just a means of teaching that is not, directly stating, the truth of things as he sees it, well, where would you find that? Where does Tocqueville go for his information about the soul? This is going to point us to that. He says, it is not certain that Socrates and his school had well-fixed opinions on what must happen to man in the other life. In fact, if we read, Socrates in Plato, for example, the dialogues in which Socrates appears, he'll say things like he's not even sure if there is an afterlife, but if there is, he imagines it's like this or like that, and he has some different versions of that in different dialogues. So he doesn't have any fixed beliefs about that. So what Socrates is doing is not religion, right? It's philosophy. He is using his own mind to try to figure out the nature of things, and he's well aware that he doesn't have all the answers. He doesn't know for sure about the afterlife, because how could you until you go there, right? Unless God tells you, which is what religion is, then just on your own powers, you're only guessing what is there. But the sole belief on which Socrates and his school were settled, that the soul has nothing in common with the body and survives it, was enough to give to Platonic philosophy the sort of sublime impulse that distinguishes it. So this is a big clue as to where Tocqueville is getting his views of the soul. He's saying, the soul is associated with Christianity and theology in the medieval and the modern world. But if you go back to the ancient world, the soul is a teaching of philosophy, which is not tied to any particular religious belief. It's simply based on philosophical reflection on human nature. And that's what Tocqueville has been doing throughout the book, is saying this is human nature. We have souls, and we can see the souls. If we know how to see them, we can see that we have souls. Okay? So who could teach you about this from a philosophical point of view? Who could tell you what you can know about your soul based on reason and nature? He's saying Plato. When you read Plato, he says, you notice that in the times prior to him and in his time, many writers existed who advocated materialism. So Machiavelli was not coming out of nowhere. The ancient world, there were plenty of materialists. But Tocqueville says these writers, these materialists of the ancient world, have not survived to our time, or have survived only very incompletely. That is, their books, right? And their books were not copied as meticulously, and we don't have copies of many of their books, or only fragments. This is very interestingly related to what Machiavelli has to say about Moses, Cyrus, Romulus, Theseus having power after they're dead, Machiavelli wanting to have power after he's dead. Tocqueville is looking at a similar kind of a dynamic here. He's saying, which authors survived from the classical world till today, which is a hard thing. The vast majority of people who wrote in the ancient world, we don't have their stuff anymore. We don't have copies of it. They disappeared a long time ago. But how does he explain why we have the works of Plato and we don't have the works of so many other people from that time period? He says it has been so in nearly all the centuries. He's obviously making an exception for the modern world, right? Machiavelli is still powerful in Tocqueville's time and in our time. But he's saying overall in human history, this is the way it tends to go. Most of the great literary reputations are joined with spiritualism, that is, with a belief in the soul. The instinct and the taste of humanity uphold this doctrine. They often save this doctrine despite the men themselves and make the names of those who are attached to it linger on. So this is another counter maneuver to Machiavelli. Machiavelli thinks that he's going to get this immortality from becoming the founder of a materialist society, basically. Very paradoxical. Machiavelli is going to have this kind of immortal, glory, which is intangible, by establishing a society that's focused on tangible material goods. But Tocqueville is countering that, saying that's not really true to human nature, and in the long run, that is going to lose out. The authors who are going to be immortal are going to be the Platonists, are going to be the one who talk about the soul, because people will always have the needs of their soul, and they'll always need to know about that, and they're always going to want to turn to those authors who can explain it to them. So he closes with these words reiterating his point here about human nature and about, therefore, the nature of politics and society and leadership. The heart of man is more vast than you suppose. It can at the same time enclose the taste for the good things of the earth and the love of the good things of heaven. Sometimes the heart seems to give itself madly to one of the two, but it never goes for a long time without thinking of the other. So in modern times, Tocqueville is saying, we may be obsessed with material things. It doesn't help us. It doesn't make us happy. And people are going to realize that. They may not know what to do about that. So the task of leaders in the modern era is to cultivate their knowledge of the soul and to try to share that with people as much as possible, to counterbalance and correct as much as possible those harmful tendencies of the modern world. And as we saw, Tocqueville has a lot to say about these things, but his book is not a treatise on the soul or on those topics. It only comes up in passing, although in very important ways. So part of his political science is pointing us back to the sources where we can study this in more depth. And in essence, he's saying for those who have any aspiration to leadership in modern society, you need to read Plato. Plato is going to teach you about what the soul is, and he's going to teach you about your own nature. He's going to help you to achieve self-knowledge through philosophical techniques, and that is the sort of immortal value of Plato that Tocqueville is pointing to. So in this course, the next thing we will do is turn to Plato. We're going to read one of the relatively short dialogues, the Gorgias, but the themes of the Gorgias are going to help us to see very clearly what Plato would have to say about Machiavelli. His argument is going to be very similar to what we saw in Tocqueville, but how does he try to demonstrate the existence, the nature, and the needs of the human soul that Tocqueville is referencing in his book so many centuries later?